Welcome to a story that will touch your heart and remind you that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can change our lives forever. This is the tale of Dr. Michael Harrison, a renowned cardiac surgeon who thought he had seen everything in his 20-year career, until a 7-year-old girl walked into his operating room and turned his world upside down. If you enjoy emotional stories that celebrate the power of human connection and the secrets we carry, don't forget to like and follow for more heartwarming tales. Dr. Michael Harrison adjusted his surgical mask as he reviewed the patient file one more time. Room 314, emergency cardiac surgery, 7 years old. The words blurred together on the page as they had countless times before. After 2 decades of performing life-saving operations, he had learned to maintain professional distance. It was the only way to survive in a profession where emotions could cost lives. The sterile corridors of St. Mary's Children's Hospital echoed with his footsteps as he made his way to the preoperative consultation room. Another day, another chance to save a life. The routine had become second nature. Review the case, meet the family, explain the procedure, perform the surgery, move on to the next patient. It was a system that had served him well, keeping the pain of loss at arm's length while allowing him to focus on what he did best. Michael paused outside the consultation room door, his hand resting on the cold metal handle. Through the small window, he could see a woman sitting beside a hospital bed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. These moments never got easier, no matter how many times he witnessed them. Parents facing their worst nightmare, clinging to hope while battling despair. He had his speech prepared, the same carefully crafted words of reassurance he had delivered hundreds of times before. He knocked gently and entered the room. The woman looked up, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She was younger than he had expected, probably in her late 20s, with the kind of exhausted beauty that comes from sleepless nights spent worrying about a child. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Dr. Harrison. I'll be performing your daughter's surgery today." The woman nodded, attempting to compose herself. "Thank you for taking her case, doctor. The other physician said you were the best chance she had." Michael's eyes moved to the small figure lying in the hospital bed. Even in sleep, the child's face showed signs of the struggle her tiny body was enduring. Her dark hair was spread across the white pillow like spilled ink, and her breathing was shallow and labored. The monitors beside her bed painted a picture of a heart working far too hard to keep up with the demands of a growing body. "What's her name?" Michael asked, his voice gentler than usual as he approached the bedside. "Emma Rose Thompson." The mother's voice cracked as she spoke her daughter's name. "She just turned 7 last month. We had such a beautiful party. She wanted a princess theme, and we decorated the whole backyard with pink streamers and fairy lights. She was so happy, doctor. She danced and laughed and ate too much cake just like any normal little girl." Michael nodded, making notes in the file while listening to the familiar story of a child living a normal life until the symptoms began. It was always the same pattern. Subtle signs that parents initially dismissed, followed by increasing concern, then the devastating diagnosis that turned their world upside down. "When did you first notice something was wrong?" he asked, settling into the chair beside the bed. Mrs. Thompson wiped her eyes with a tissue that had clearly seen too much use. "About 6 weeks ago, she started getting tired more easily. At first, I thought it was just a growth spurt, you know. Kids get tired when they're growing. But then she started having trouble keeping up with her friends at school. Her teacher called to say Emma was falling asleep during class, which wasn't like her at all. She's always been such an energetic child." Michael watched as the mother's hand found her daughter's small fingers, intertwining them with desperate tenderness. It was a gesture he had seen countless times, the instinctive need to maintain physical contact, as if love alone could transfer strength from parent to child. The pediatrician said it was probably nothing serious, maybe anemia or a vitamin deficiency. We did blood tests, changed her diet, made sure she was getting enough sleep. But she kept getting worse. Last week, she collapsed during recess, just fell right over while she was playing on the swings. The school nurse said her lips were blue. The clinical picture was becoming clearer with each detail. Michael had seen this presentation many times before. A child with an undiagnosed congenital heart defect finally reaching the point where the body could no longer compensate. The heart, working overtime since birth, eventually begins to fail under the strain. That's when they brought her to the emergency room, Mrs. Thompson continued. The doctors here did all sorts of tests, echocardiograms and CT scans and things I can't even pronounce. They said she has something called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. They said without surgery, she might not. She couldn't finish the sentence, the words too terrible to speak aloud. Michael had delivered this same diagnosis many times before, but it never lost its impact. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome was one of the most complex congenital heart defects, requiring multiple surgeries over several years. The left side of the heart, responsible for pumping oxygenated blood to the body, was severely underdeveloped. Without intervention, children with this condition rarely survived their first year of life. Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that while Emma's condition is serious, we've made tremendous advances in treating hypoplastic left heart syndrome. The surgery I'm going to perform today is called a Norwood procedure. It's the first of 3 stages that will essentially reconstruct her heart to function with only one working ventricle. He explained the procedure in terms he hoped she could understand, describing how they would redirect blood flow and create new pathways for circulation. It was complex surgery, requiring hours in the operating room and weeks of recovery, but it offered hope for a future that would otherwise be cut tragically short. As he spoke, Michael found himself glancing repeatedly at the sleeping child. There was something about her peaceful expression that stirred an unexpected emotion in his chest. Perhaps it was the way her small hand curled around her mother's finger, or the stuffed rabbit tucked carefully under her arm, but he felt an unusual connection to this particular patient. "Doctor, can I ask you something?" Mrs. Thompson's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Of course. Do you have children of your own?" The question hit him like a physical blow, just as it always did. Michael's carefully maintained professional composure faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "No, I don't," he replied simply, offering no further explanation. But the truth was far more complicated than his brief response suggested. Michael did have a child once, or rather, he should have had a child. 23 years ago, his girlfriend Sarah had given birth to a daughter with severe congenital heart defects. The pregnancy had been difficult, filled with concerning ultrasound results and warnings from specialists about the baby's prognosis. When their daughter was born, she lived for only 18 hours. 18 hours that Michael had spent in the NICU, holding her tiny hand and making promises he couldn't keep. 18 hours that had changed the trajectory of his entire life, driving him to specialize in pediatric cardiac surgery with a determination that bordered on obsession. Sarah had wanted to name their daughter Emma. The memory crashed over him like a wave, threatening to pull him under. He had spent years building walls around that pain, using his work as both shield and sword against the grief that never fully subsided. But now, looking at this 7-year-old Emma with her dark hair and peaceful expression, those walls began to crack. "Dr. Harrison, are you all right?" Mrs. Thompson was looking at him with concern. Michael cleared his throat and straightened his shoulders, forcing himself back into professional mode. "I'm fine, just reviewing the surgical plan in my mind. I want everything to be perfect for Emma." He spent another 20 minutes with Mrs. Thompson, answering her questions and providing reassurance about the surgical team and post-operative care. All the while, he found his attention drawn to the sleeping child, noting details that had nothing to do with her medical condition. The way her eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks, the small scar on her chin that probably came from a childhood tumble, the worn appearance of the stuffed rabbit that clearly provided comfort during difficult times. When he finally left the consultation room, Michael felt uncharacteristically shaken. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and took several deep breaths, trying to regain his equilibrium. This was exactly why he maintained emotional distance from his patients. Getting too involved clouded judgment and compromised his ability to perform at the highest level. But as he walked toward the surgical suite to begin preparations, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be different. Something about Emma Thompson had reached past his carefully constructed defenses, awakening emotions he had spent decades trying to suppress. The little girl sleeping peacefully in room 314 didn't know it yet, but she was about to change her surgeon's life as profoundly as he was about to change hers. The operating room was already being prepared when Michael arrived. His surgical team, nurses and technicians he had worked with for years, moved with practiced efficiency around the sterile space. They knew his preferences, his methods, his expectations. Together, they had saved hundreds of young lives, each success a small victory against the cruel randomness of congenital heart disease. As Michael began his pre-surgical routine, scrubbing in and reviewing the procedural plan one final time, he made a silent promise to the sleeping child in room 314. He would give everything he had to ensure her surgery was successful. He would draw upon every skill, every technique, every lesson learned from 2 decades of cardiac surgery. And maybe, just maybe, he would finally be able to save the Emma he couldn't save 23 years ago. The surgical suite at St. Mary's Children's Hospital was a cathedral of modern medicine, its bright lights and gleaming instruments creating an atmosphere of sterile hope. Dr. Michael Harrison stood at the scrub sink, methodically washing his hands with the same ritual he had performed thousands of times before. The warm water cascaded over his fingers as he worked the antibacterial soap into a rich lather, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in memories he had spent years trying to forget. 23 years ago, he had stood in a similar room, not as the surgeon but as the helpless father watching other doctors fight to save his daughter's life. He had been a medical student then, just beginning his residency in general surgery, full of confidence in the power of medicine to heal and save. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had chosen to dedicate his life to the very specialty that had been unable to save his own child. The scrub nurse approached with his surgical gown, and Michael allowed her to help him into the sterile garment. His hands moved through the familiar motions of gowning and gloving, but his thoughts remained fixed on the patient waiting in the operating room. Emma Thompson. Even her name was a cruel twist of fate, a reminder of dreams that had died in an incubator 23 years ago. "Dr. Harrison, we're ready for you," the circulating nurse announced from the doorway. Michael nodded and entered the operating room, where Emma lay unconscious on the table, her small body dwarfed by the array of monitors and equipment surrounding her. The anesthesiologist gave him a thumbs up, indicating that she was stable and ready for the procedure to begin. The surgical team took their positions around the table, each person knowing their role in the intricate dance that would unfold over the next several hours. "Scalpel," Michael said, extending his hand toward the scrub nurse. As the blade touched Emma's skin, making the first incision, Michael felt an unexpected tremor in his usually steady hands. He paused for a fraction of a second, collecting himself before continuing with the precise movements that had become second nature. The chest cavity opened under his skilled hands, revealing the tiny heart that had been struggling to sustain life for 7 years. "There she is," he murmured, more to himself than to the team around him. The heart was indeed malformed, just as the diagnostic images had shown. The left ventricle was severely underdeveloped, barely functional, while the right side worked overtime to compensate for its partner's inadequacy. It was a cruel genetic lottery that had condemned this child to a life of medical interventions and uncertain outcomes. As Michael began the complex reconstruction, his mind drifted to another operating room, another time, another Emma. His daughter had been born at 36 weeks, her heart defect so severe that the neonatologists had prepared him and Sarah for the worst. But for 18 precious hours, she had fought with a determination that amazed the medical staff. "Suture," Michael requested, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil brewing beneath the surface. He worked with methodical precision, rerouting blood vessels and creating new pathways for circulation. The Norwood procedure was one of the most challenging operations in pediatric cardiac surgery, requiring the surgeon to essentially rebuild the heart's architecture. One wrong move, one misplaced suture, could mean the difference between life and death. "Her vitals are holding steady," the anesthesiologist reported. blood pressure 110/60, heart rate 85. Michael nodded, not looking up from his work. The hardest part of the procedure was yet to come, connecting the reconstructed aorta to the right ventricle, forcing the single functional chamber to do the work of two. It was an elegant solution to an impossible problem, but it required perfect execution. As he worked, Michael found himself thinking about Mrs. Thompson, waiting anxiously in the family room. He had seen that look of desperate hope in countless parents' eyes over the years, but he remembered it most clearly from his own experience. Sarah had worn that same expression as they waited for news about their daughter's surgery, clinging to each other in the sterile waiting room while their world hung in the balance. "How much longer do you estimate, Dr. Harrison?" asked the perfusionist, the specialist responsible for maintaining Emma's circulation during the operation. "Another hour, maybe 90 minutes, Michael replied, his hands never pausing in their delicate work. The surgery was progressing well, better than he had dared to hope. Emma's heart was responding positively to the reconstruction, adapting to its new configuration with the resilience that never failed to amaze him in pediatric patients. Children's bodies had a remarkable ability to heal and adapt, a biological optimism that often exceeded their doctors' expectations. "She's a fighter," commented Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatric cardiac anesthesiologist who had worked with Michael on dozens of similar cases. "Her numbers have been rock solid throughout the procedure." Michael smiled behind his surgical mask. "Yes, she is." But as he continued working, carefully placing each suture with the precision of a master craftsman, Michael's mind wandered to the conversation he would soon have with Mrs. Thompson. The surgery appeared to be successful, but he knew from experience that the real challenges lay ahead. The recovery period would be long and difficult, filled with potential complications and setbacks. Emma would need 2 more surgeries over the next several years, each one carrying its own risks and uncertainties. The original Emma, his daughter, had never made it to the first surgery. Her heart defects had been even more severe than this little girl's, complicated by other genetic abnormalities that made surgical intervention impossible. She had lived for 18 hours, breathing with the assistance of machines, her tiny chest rising and falling with mechanical precision, while her parents held vigil beside her isolette. "Final sutures going in now," Michael announced to the team. As he completed the last connections, Michael felt a familiar mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration that came with finishing a complex surgery. His back ached from hours of bending over the operating table, and his hands were cramped from the precise movements required for microsurgery. But the satisfaction of a job well done, of a life potentially saved, outweighed the physical discomfort. "Coming off bypass," the perfusionist announced. This was the moment of truth. As the heart-lung machine was gradually withdrawn, Emma's reconstructed heart would have to take over the full responsibility of circulating blood throughout her body. Michael watched the monitors intently, ready to intervene if any problems arose. The heart responded beautifully, beating with strong, regular contractions that sent blood flowing through the newly created pathways. The surgical team exchanged glances of cautious optimism as Emma's vital signs remained stable, without mechanical support. "She's doing great," Dr. Chen reported with a smile in her voice. "All parameters normal." Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by an unexpected surge of emotion. He had performed hundreds of similar procedures, but this one felt different. This one felt personal in a way that caught him off guard. "Excellent work, everyone," he said to the surgical team as they began the process of closing Emma's chest. This was a textbook Norwood procedure. But even as he spoke the words of professional satisfaction, Michael's mind was already moving ahead to the recovery process. Emma would spend the next several days in the pediatric cardiac intensive care unit, monitored around the clock by specialized nurses and physicians. If all went well, she would gradually regain consciousness, be weaned off the ventilator, and begin the long journey back to health. "Dr. Harrison, would you like me to speak with the family?" asked Dr. James Rodriguez, the pediatric cardiac surgery fellow who had assisted with the operation. "No, thank you. I'll handle it myself," Michael replied. perhaps a bit more quickly than necessary. As the team finished closing the surgical site and prepared to transport Emma to the PICU, Michael found himself reluctant to leave the operating room. There was something about this case, this patient, that had awakened feelings he had spent years suppressing. The professional distance he had carefully maintained throughout his career seemed to be crumbling, replaced by a personal investment that both thrilled and terrified him. Walking toward the family waiting area, Michael rehearsed the conversation he was about to have with Mrs. Thompson. He would explain that the surgery had gone well, that Emma's heart was functioning properly, and that the prognosis was cautiously optimistic. He would outline the recovery process, the potential complications to watch for, and the long-term treatment plan. It was a conversation he had had countless times before, but somehow it felt different this time. Mrs. Thompson was pacing the small waiting room when Michael arrived, still wearing his surgical scrubs. She turned toward him with an expression of desperate hope, her eyes searching his face for any clue about her daughter's condition. "How is she?" she asked before he could speak. "The surgery went very well," Michael began, watching as relief flooded across her features. "Emma's heart is responding beautifully to the reconstruction. She's stable and has been moved to the cardiac intensive care unit." Mrs. Thompson sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "Thank God," she whispered, covering her face with her hands. Michael sat down beside her, his usual professional composure softened by an unexpected tenderness. "She's going to have a long recovery ahead of her, Mrs. Thompson. The next few days will be critical, and she'll need ongoing care for years to come. But I want you to know that Emma fought like a champion in there. She's a remarkable little girl. Can I see her?" "In a little while. She's still under anesthesia, and the ICU staff needs some time to get her settled. But yes, you'll be able to see her soon." Mrs. Thompson looked at him with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dr. Harrison, I don't know how to thank you. You've given me my daughter back." The words hit Michael harder than he had expected. For a moment, he was back in that other hospital room 23 years ago, watching his own daughter slip away, despite everything the medical team could do. This time, the outcome was different. This time, the little girl named Emma would go home to her mother. "Mrs. Thompson, there's something I need to tell you about the recovery process." Michael spent the next 30 minutes explaining the complex journey that lay ahead, the gradual weaning from the ventilator, the careful monitoring for complications, the medications that would be required, and the 2 additional surgeries that would be needed over the next few years. It was a lot of information for a frightened mother to absorb, but he took his time, answering every question with patience and compassion. As he spoke, Michael found himself thinking about the original Emma, the daughter he had lost before she had a chance to live. Perhaps saving this Emma wouldn't bring his daughter back, but it felt like a form of redemption, a way to honor the memory of the child who had died too soon. When he finally returned to his office that evening, Michael sat at his desk and stared at the framed photograph he kept hidden in the bottom drawer. It showed him and Sarah holding their newborn daughter, taken during those precious 18 hours when hope had still been possible. The baby in the photograph looked peaceful, unaware of the battle raging in her tiny chest. For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to really look at the photograph, to remember the weight of his daughter in his arms and the sound of Sarah's voice as she sang lullabies to their dying child. The pain was still there, as sharp as ever, but it was accompanied by something new, a sense of purpose that went beyond professional achievement. Tomorrow he would check on Emma Thompson, monitor her progress through the critical early stages of recovery. He would be there to celebrate each small victory and to provide comfort during the inevitable setbacks. And maybe in the process of helping this little girl heal, he would find a way to heal the broken pieces of his own heart. The Pediatric Cardiac Intensive Care Unit at St. Mary's Children's Hospital was a place where miracles and heartbreak existed side by side, separated only by the thin walls between patient rooms. Dr. Michael Harrison made his way through the familiar corridors at 6 in the morning, earlier than his usual rounds, drawn by an inexplicable need to check on Emma Thompson. The night shift nurses nodded their greetings as he passed, accustomed to seeing him at all hours when he had a particularly challenging case. Emma's room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the soft glow of multiple monitors that tracked every aspect of her recovery. She lay motionless in the hospital bed, still connected to the ventilator that breathed for her while her body focused its energy on healing. Her mother sat in the bedside chair, clutching the worn stuffed rabbit that had become Emma's constant companion. "Any changes overnight?" Michael asked the night nurse quietly. "She's been stable all night, doctor. Vitals are strong, and she's been showing some signs of waking up. The anesthesiologist thinks she might be ready to try breathing on her own later today." Michael approached the bedside and checked the monitors himself, noting the steady rhythm of Emma's heart and the reassuring numbers that indicated her body was accepting the surgical reconstruction. Mrs. Thompson looked up at him with tired eyes that held a mixture of hope and exhaustion. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. How are you holding up?" "I haven't slept much," she admitted. "I keep watching her chest rise and fall, counting each breath." "Is that normal? This need to keep vigil?" Michael pulled up a chair beside her, abandoning his usual professional distance. "Completely normal. I've seen parents do exactly what you're doing countless times. The need to watch over your child, to somehow will them back to health through the power of your presence. It's one of the strongest forces I've ever witnessed." As he spoke, Michael found himself remembering his own sleepless nights 23 years ago, sitting beside another tiny patient who shared this child's name. He and Sarah had taken turns holding their daughter's hand, whispering words of love and encouragement that they hoped would somehow reach her failing heart. "Dr. Harrison, can I ask you something personal?" Mrs. Thompson's voice was hesitant. "Of course. Yesterday, when I asked if you had children, you seemed, I don't know, sad? I hope I didn't say something wrong." Michael was quiet for a long moment, studying Emma's peaceful face as he wrestled with whether to share the truth. He had spent years keeping his personal tragedy separate from his professional life, but something about this case, this mother's desperate love for her daughter, made him want to break that silence. "I did have a child once," he said finally. "A daughter. She was born with heart defects similar to Emma's, but more severe. She lived for 18 hours. Mrs. Thompson's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "It's all right. It was a long time ago. 23 years to be exact." Michael's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the depth of emotion he still carried. Her name was Emma, too. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with significance. Mrs. Thompson stared at him with new understanding, suddenly grasping the deeper meaning behind his dedication to her daughter's case. "Is that why you became a pediatric cardiac surgeon?" she asked softly. "Yes, I couldn't save my Emma, but I thought maybe I could save other people's daughters, other parents' children." He looked directly at Mrs. Thompson. "Your Emma is going to be one of the lucky ones. She's going to go home, grow up, maybe have children of her own someday." Before Mrs. Thompson could respond, a small movement from the bed caught their attention. Emma's eyelids fluttered, and her fingers twitched slightly. The monitors showed an increase in her heart rate and brain activity, indicating she was beginning to emerge from the anesthesia. "She's waking up," Michael said, moving closer to the bed. Emma, can you hear me?" The little girl's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. She tried to speak but couldn't because of the breathing tube, and panic began to set in as she realized she couldn't make a sound. "Shh, sweetheart. It's okay," her mother said, gently stroking her forehead. "You're in the hospital. You had surgery and you're getting better. This tube is helping you breathe, but it's only temporary." Emma's frightened eyes found her mother's face, and some of the panic subsided. Then her gaze moved to Michael, and something extraordinary happened. Despite the confusion and disorientation that typically accompanied waking up from major surgery, Emma seemed to focus on him with unusual clarity. "I'm Dr. Harrison," he said gently. "I'm the one who fixed your heart. You did so well during the surgery, Emma. You're a very brave little girl." What happened next would stay with Michael for the rest of his life. Emma, despite being unable to speak, despite the tubes and wires and medical equipment surrounding her, managed to lift her small hand toward him. It was a gesture of trust and connection that transcended words, a moment of pure human communication that cut through all the clinical detachment he had built around his heart. Without thinking, Michael took her tiny hand in his much larger one. "I'm here, Emma. You're safe and you're going to be just fine." Over the next several hours, Emma's condition continued to improve. The respiratory therapist worked with her to test her breathing capacity, and by afternoon, the decision was made to remove the ventilator. It was always a tense moment, the transition from mechanical breathing to independent respiration, but Emma handled it like the fighter she had proven herself to be. "Well done, Emma," Michael said as she took her first independent breaths. "How does it feel to breathe on your own again?" "It feels different," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "My chest feels tight." "That's normal. You've had major surgery and your body is still healing. The tightness will get better every day." Michael adjusted her pillows to help her breathe more comfortably. "Are you in any pain?" Emma considered the question seriously, as if she were conducting a careful inventory of her body's sensations. "A little, but not too bad." "Mommy, did Dr. Harrison really fix my heart?" Mrs. Thompson smiled through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. He made it all better." "Can I see the scar?" Michael chuckled. "Not today, Emma. We need to keep the incision covered while it heals. But in a few days, when we change the dressing, you can take a look if you want to." "Will it be a big scar?" "It will be visible, yes. But I like to think of surgical scars as battle wounds. They show that you fought hard and won." Emma seemed to consider this. "Like a superhero?" "Exactly like a superhero. You have a superhero heart now." Over the next few days, Michael found himself spending more time in Emma's room than was strictly necessary from a medical standpoint. He told himself he was simply being thorough, monitoring her progress carefully because of the complexity of her case. But the truth was more complicated. Something about this brave little girl had awakened feelings he had buried long ago. Emma, for her part, seemed to have formed an attachment to her surgeon. She would light up when he entered the room, eager to show him her progress in physical therapy, or to share stories about her dreams from the night before. She had begun asking her mother to read to her from a book of fairy tales, and she would always invite Dr. Harrison to listen if he happened to be in the room during story time. Once upon a time, Mrs. Thompson read one afternoon, there was a beautiful princess who lived in a castle made of crystal. She had everything she could ever want, except for one thing. Her heart was made of ice and she couldn't feel love or joy or happiness. Emma listened intently as she always did during these stories, but she kept glancing at Michael as if checking to see his reaction to the tale. The princess searched everywhere for someone who could help her. The story continued. She visited wise wizards and powerful witches, but none of them could warm her frozen heart. Until one day she met a simple woodcutter who saw past her icy exterior to the goodness within. "What did the woodcutter do?" Emma asked, though she had heard this story several times before. "He didn't try to melt her heart with magic or potions," her mother continued. "Instead, he simply treated her with kindness and compassion. And slowly, day by day, the princess felt her heart beginning to thaw." Michael found himself drawn into the story despite himself. There was something about the metaphor of a frozen heart, slowly learning to feel again, that resonated with his own experience. For years, he had protected himself from emotional attachment, keeping his heart as cold and clinical as the operating room where he worked. "Did the princess's heart ever completely thaw?" Emma asked. "Yes, sweetheart. Love has a way of melting even the coldest hearts." After story time ended and Mrs. Thompson stepped out to get coffee, Emma turned to Michael with the serious expression she wore when she had something important to say. "Dr. Harrison, are you sad?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that, Emma?" "Sometimes when you think nobody is looking, your face gets sad, like you're thinking about something that makes you hurt inside." Michael was amazed by her perceptiveness. 7 years old, and she could read emotions with the accuracy of someone much older. "Sometimes I do get sad," he admitted. Everyone gets sad sometimes. Is it because of your little girl, the one who went to heaven? Michael's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't mentioned his daughter's death to Emma, only to her mother. But somehow this intuitive child had picked up on the undercurrents of grief that still flowed through his life. How did you know about that? I heard Mommy talking to Nurse Patricia about it. She said you lost a little girl a long time ago and that's why you became a heart doctor. Emma's voice was gentle, wise beyond her years. I think she would be proud of you for fixing other kids' hearts. The simple statement hit Michael with unexpected force. In all the years since his daughter's death, through all the therapy sessions and sleepless nights and professional achievements, no one had ever suggested that his lost child might be proud of the path his grief had led him down. Thank you, Emma. That means more to me than you know. Dr. Harrison? Yes? I think your heart isn't frozen anymore. I think it's getting warmer. As Michael left the hospital that evening, Emma's words echoed in his mind. She was right, he realized. Somewhere in the process of caring for this remarkable little girl, the walls around his heart had begun to crumble. The protective ice that had kept him safe from emotional pain was starting to melt, and for the first time in 23 years, he wasn't afraid of what that might mean. Walking through the parking garage to his car, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. Not just professional satisfaction or clinical success, but genuine hope for his own emotional future. Emma Thompson had done more than survive her surgery. She had reminded him that healing was possible, not just for damaged hearts in pediatric patients, but for the wounded souls of the people who cared for them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in Emma's recovery, new milestones to celebrate and obstacles to overcome. But tonight, for the first time in years, Dr. Michael Harrison went home with a smile on his face and warmth in his heart. 2 weeks had passed since Emma's surgery, and her recovery was progressing better than anyone had dared to hope. The pediatric cardiac intensive care unit had become her temporary home, but it was a home filled with laughter and stories, coloring books and stuffed animals. Dr. Michael Harrison found himself looking forward to his daily visits with an anticipation that surprised him, drawn not just by professional duty, but by genuine affection for the remarkable little girl who had somehow seen straight through to his wounded soul. Emma was sitting up in bed when he arrived for morning rounds, her dark hair neatly braided by her mother, and a bright smile lighting up her face. The transformation from the critically ill child he had first met was nothing short of miraculous. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her breathing was strong and steady. Most importantly, her eyes sparkled with the kind of mischief that indicated a spirit fully engaged with the world around her. "Dr. Harrison," she called out as he entered the room, "look what I made for you." She held up a crayon drawing that depicted 2 stick figures standing beside what appeared to be a large red heart. One figure was much taller than the other and wore what looked like a doctor's coat. The smaller figure had long dark hair and was holding the hand of the taller one. "This is beautiful, Emma. Tell me about it." "That's you, and that's me, and that's my new heart that you fixed." She pointed to each element of the drawing with pride. "See? We're holding hands because we're friends now." Michael felt his throat tighten with emotion. In his 20-year career, he had received many gifts from grateful patients and families. Thank you cards, flowers, even expensive bottles of wine. But this simple crayon drawing touched him more deeply than any of those gestures ever had. "I love it, Emma, thank you. I'm going to hang it in my office where I can see it every day." "Really? You're not just saying that?" "Really. It will remind me of the bravest patient I've ever had." Emma beamed at the compliment, then lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "Dr. Harrison, can I tell you something?" "Of course. Sometimes at night, when the machines are quiet and Mommy is sleeping, I talk to your little girl, the one who went to heaven." Michael's breath caught. He glanced at Mrs. Thompson, who was listening from her chair beside the bed with tears in her eyes. "What do you talk to her about?" he managed to ask. "I tell her that you're taking really good care of me, and that she doesn't need to worry about you being sad anymore. I think she can hear me, you know. Sometimes I feel like someone is watching over me, making sure I'm okay." The innocence and sincerity in Emma's voice nearly undid him completely. How could a 7-year-old child, recovering from major heart surgery, be concerned about comforting a grown man she barely knew? Yet somehow, this extraordinary little girl had intuited not just his pain, but also his need for healing. "Emma, that's the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Dr. Harrison, why don't you have any other kids? After your little girl went to heaven, I mean." It was a question that cut straight to the heart of his personal struggles. After losing their daughter, he and Sarah had tried for years to have another child, but the grief and stress had eventually torn their relationship apart. Sarah had wanted to try again immediately, desperate to fill the emptiness left by their daughter's death. Michael, terrified of experiencing that kind of loss again, had withdrawn emotionally, throwing himself into his medical training with obsessive dedication. It's complicated, Emma. Sometimes when people lose someone they love very much, it becomes scary to love someone new. They're afraid of getting hurt again. Emma considered this with the serious expression she wore when processing difficult concepts. But if you never love anyone new, then you stay hurt forever, right? Like the ice princess in the story. Her insight was startling in its clarity. That's exactly right, Emma. Very wise. Maybe you just haven't met the right people yet. Maybe you need to practice loving again like I had to practice walking after my surgery. Mrs. Thompson spoke up from her chair. Emma, Dr. Harrison is a very busy man. He has lots of patients to take care of. But everyone needs a family, Emma insisted, even busy doctors. Michael found himself smiling despite the emotional weight of the conversation. You know what, Emma? You're absolutely right. Everyone does need a family. Over the following days, Michael began to realize that Emma and her mother had become something very much like family to him. He started arriving at the hospital earlier and staying later, finding excuses to check on Emma's progress even when it wasn't medically necessary. He brought her books from the hospital gift shop, helped her with the puzzles her physical therapist had assigned, and even participated in impromptu tea parties with her collection of stuffed animals. Mrs. Thompson, whose name he had learned was Catherine, had begun to feel comfortable enough to share more of their story. Emma's father had left when she was 3 years old, unable to cope with the demands of raising a child with special medical needs. Catherine had been working 2 jobs to support them and pay for Emma's medical care, but the stress of the hospitalization had forced her to take extended leave from both positions. I don't know what we're going to do when we get the hospital bills, Catherine confided to Michael one afternoon, while Emma was napping. My insurance covers most of it, but there are still going to be substantial out-of-pocket costs. And with me not working, don't worry about that right now, Michael said. The hospital has financial assistance programs, and there are charitable foundations that help families in situations like yours. We'll make sure Emma gets all the care she needs. What he didn't tell Catherine was that he had already spoken to the hospital's financial counselors about anonymously covering any costs not covered by insurance. It was something he had never done for a patient before, but then again, no patient had ever affected him the way Emma had. Dr. Harrison, can I ask you something personal? Catherine said. Of course. What was she like? Your daughter? Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at Emma's sleeping form. She was perfect, he said finally. Tiny, but perfect. She had the most delicate features, and when she opened her eyes, they were this incredible deep blue. Sarah used to say she looked like a little angel. What was her name? Emma. Emma Rose Harrison. He smiled sadly. Sarah chose the name. She said it meant whole or universal, and she wanted our daughter to feel complete despite her medical challenges. That's beautiful. And your daughter here, Catherine nodded toward the sleeping child. Her middle name is Rose, too. Emma Rose Thompson. The coincidence hit Michael like a physical blow, not just the first name, but the middle name, too. It was as if the universe was trying to tell him something, offering him a second chance at the connection he had lost so many years ago. Catherine, can I share something with you? Something I've never told anyone. Of course. When Sarah was pregnant, We used to talk about all the things we would do with our daughter. We planned family vacations and birthday parties. Imagined teaching her to ride a bike and helping her with homework. We had this whole future mapped out, full of ordinary moments that suddenly seemed precious because we thought we might lose the chance to experience them. Michael paused, gathering the courage to continue. After she died, I convinced myself that I could never have those experiences with any child, that somehow it would be a betrayal of her memory to find joy in the very things I had been denied with her. But that's not true, is it? Catherine said softly. No, it's not. These past 2 weeks spending time with Emma, I've realized that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. If anything, it grows stronger. At that moment, Emma stirred and opened her eyes, immediately focusing on the adults beside her bed. Are you talking about serious stuff without me? She asked with mock indignation. Just grown-up things, Catherine said, smoothing her daughter's hair. I want to hear grown-up things too. I'm very mature for my age. Michael laughed. Yes, you are, Emma. Very mature indeed. Dr. Harrison, I have an idea. When I get out of the hospital, maybe you could come to dinner at our house. Mommy makes really good spaghetti, and we could play board games afterward. The invitation was so simple, so natural, that it took Michael a moment to realize how significant it was. He couldn't remember the last time someone had invited him to their home for a family dinner. His social life consisted mainly of professional conferences and hospital functions, interactions that maintained the careful distance he had cultivated over the years. I would love that, Emma. I really would. Promise? I promise. That evening, after leaving the hospital, Michael drove to a cemetery he hadn't visited in over 10 years. His daughter's grave was marked by a small pink granite headstone engraved with angels and the dates that encompassed her brief life. He knelt beside the grave and placed the crayon drawing Emma had made for him against the headstone. I want you to meet someone, he said quietly. Her name is Emma, too, and she's got the biggest heart I've ever seen. I think you would have been great friends. The evening air was still and peaceful, and Michael felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since his daughter's death, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. I'm going to take care of her, he continued, not just as her doctor, but as someone who loves her, and maybe, if I'm very lucky, she and her mother will let me be part of their family. As he drove home that night, Michael thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 23 years ago, he had been a young man filled with dreams and plans that were shattered by tragedy. The path from that devastating loss to this moment of hope had been long and difficult, marked by professional success but personal isolation. Now, thanks to a brave little girl with an intuitive heart and her loving mother's grace, he was being offered something he had thought was lost forever: the chance to be part of a family, to experience the ordinary miracles of daily life, with people who mattered to him. Emma was right. His heart was definitely getting warmer, melting like ice in the spring sun, ready to embrace whatever love the future might bring. And for the first time in 23 years, Dr. Michael Harrison was no longer afraid of that possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in Emma's recovery, but also new opportunities for connection and growth. The little girl who had started as just another patient had become the key to unlocking a future he had never dared to imagine. 3 weeks into Emma's recovery, Dr. Michael Harrison received news that would change everything he thought he knew about his connection to this remarkable little girl. He was reviewing her latest test results in his office when his assistant knocked on the door, with an urgent expression on her face. Dr. Harrison, there's someone here to see you about the Thompson case. She says it's extremely important and can't wait. Michael looked up from the echocardiogram results he had been studying. Emma's heart function was improving daily, and he had been planning to discuss her discharge timeline with Catherine that afternoon. Who is it? A woman named Sarah Mitchell. She says she used to know you. The name hit Michael like a lightning bolt. Sarah Mitchell had been Sarah Coleman 23 years ago, before she married him and became Sarah Harrison, before their world fell apart and she eventually remarried someone else. His ex-wife, the mother of his lost daughter, Was here at the hospital asking to see him. Send her in, Michael said, his voice barely steady. Sarah entered his office looking older but still recognizable. Her blonde hair now streaked with silver, and her face marked by the passage of time. She moved with the same quiet grace he remembered, but there was an urgency in her manner that immediately put him on alert. Hello, Michael, thank you for seeing me. Sarah, it's been, 15 years since we last spoke? 16, actually, at the divorce proceedings. She sat down across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Michael, I need to tell you something about Emma Thompson, something I should have told you years ago. Michael felt the world tilt on its axis. What about Emma? Sarah took a deep breath, clearly struggling with how to begin. After our daughter died, after we divorced, I was lost for a long time. I moved away from the city, changed my name back to Coleman, and tried to start over. About a year later, I met a man named David Mitchell. He was kind and patient, and he helped me heal from the grief. Sarah, I don't understand what this has to do with Emma Thompson. We got married, and I thought I would never be able to have children again. The trauma of losing our Emma had convinced me that I wasn't meant to be a mother. But 2 years later, I got pregnant. It was unexpected, and I was terrified throughout the entire pregnancy. Michael's heart began to race. He had a terrible feeling about where this conversation was heading. I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. David and I named her Emma Rose Mitchell after our lost daughter. I wanted to honor her memory while giving this new child her own identity. The room seemed to spin around Michael. Sarah, what are you saying? Emma Rose Mitchell is Emma Rose Thompson. Michael, the little girl you've been treating, the child whose life you saved 3 weeks ago, is our daughter. Your daughter. The words hung in the air like an impossible truth that defied comprehension. Michael stared at Sarah, trying to process what she had just told him. The Emma lying in the hospital bed upstairs, the 7-year-old girl who had stolen his heart and reminded him how to love again, was his own flesh and blood. That's impossible, he whispered. Her mother is Catherine Thompson. She told me Emma's father left when she was 3. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. David died in a car accident when Emma was 3 years old. I was devastated, lost again, just like after our first Emma died. I started drinking, Michael. I couldn't cope with being a single mother while dealing with my grief. I made terrible choices. Michael felt sick. What kind of choices? I lost my job, couldn't pay rent, and Child Protective Services got involved. Emma was placed in foster care while I went to rehabilitation. Catherine Thompson was her foster mother, and when I completed my program, I was supposed to get Emma back. But by then, Emma had been with Catherine for over a year. She was happy, stable, loved, and I was still so fragile, so uncertain about my ability to be the mother she deserved. So you gave up your parental rights, Michael said, understanding flooding through him. Catherine wanted to adopt her, and Emma called her mommy. I thought it would be selfish to disrupt her life just because I had finally gotten my act together. So yes, I signed the papers. Catherine legally adopted Emma and changed her last name to Thompson. I moved across the country and tried to build a new life. Michael stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the hospital parking garage. His mind was reeling with the implications of what Sarah had just revealed. Emma Thompson, the patient who had awakened his frozen heart, was actually Emma Mitchell, his biological daughter. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you contact me when she was placed in foster care? Because I was ashamed, Michael. Ashamed that I had failed as a mother. Ashamed that I couldn't handle raising our daughter alone. And honestly, I didn't think you would want to know. After our first baby died, you shut down completely. You made it clear that you never wanted to risk that kind of pain again. Michael turned to face her, anger and confusion warring in his chest. That was 20 years ago, Sarah. People change. I deserve to know I had a daughter. You're right. You did deserve to know. But I convinced myself that Emma was better off without knowing about her complicated history. Catherine has been an amazing mother to her, Michael. Better than I ever could have been. How did you find out she was here? How did you know I was her surgeon? Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a newspaper clipping. There was an article in the medical journal about your surgical program. It mentioned that you had successfully performed a complex cardiac surgery on a 7-year-old girl named Emma Thompson. When I saw the photograph they included of you with the patient, I recognized her immediately. She looks just like our first Emma would have looked at that age. Michael took the clipping and stared at the photograph. There he was, standing beside Emma's hospital bed, both of them smiling at the camera. How had he not seen the resemblance? The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, even the way she tilted her head when she was thinking. They were all familiar because they were his own features reflected back at him. "Does Catherine know?" he asked. "No." The adoption was closed, and Emma's birth certificate was amended to show Catherine as her birth mother. As far as Catherine knows, Emma's biological parents were unnamed individuals who couldn't care for her. And Emma, does she know she's adopted? I don't think so. She was so young when the adoption was finalized, and Catherine has raised her as her own from the beginning. To Emma, Catherine is her mother in every way that matters. Michael sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this revelation. For 3 weeks he had been caring for his own daughter without knowing it. The connection he had felt to her, the inexplicable bond that had formed between them, suddenly made perfect sense. On some subconscious level, perhaps they had recognized each other. "What do you want from me, Sarah? Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw the article, and I saw the way you were looking at her in that photograph. You love her, don't you? Even without knowing she was yours, you fell in love with our daughter." Michael nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. "I want you to know that I'm not here to disrupt her life or to take her away from Catherine. Emma is happy and loved, and that's all that matters to me. But I thought you deserved to know the truth, especially since you've become such an important part of her medical care. Does anyone else know you're here?" "No. I flew in this morning just to see you. I'm flying back to Seattle tonight." Michael stood up again, this time moving toward the door. "I need to see her. I need to look at her knowing what I know now." "Michael, wait. What are you going to do with this information?" He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "I don't know. I honestly don't know, but I need to see my daughter." Walking through the hospital corridors toward Emma's room, Michael felt as if he were moving through a dream. Every interaction he had had with Emma over the past 3 weeks took on new meaning in light of Sarah's revelation. The instant connection they had shared, Emma's intuitive understanding of his emotional state, her uncanny ability to read his moods and offer comfort. It all made sense now. Emma was sitting up in bed when he entered the room, working on a coloring book while Catherine read a magazine nearby. She looked up as he approached, and for the first time, Michael saw himself clearly reflected in her features. How had he missed it before? The shape of her nose, the way her eyebrows arched when she was curious, even the dimple in her left cheek that appeared when she smiled widely. "Dr. Harrison, look what I colored for you today." She held up a picture of a rainbow arching over a house with smoke coming from its chimney. 2 stick figures stood in front of the house, one tall and one small, both with their arms raised toward the colorful sky. "That's you and me celebrating that my heart is all better," Emma explained. "And see the rainbow? That means everything is going to be happy from now on." Michael took the coloring page with hands that trembled slightly. His daughter, his own daughter, had drawn a picture of their future together without even knowing they were connected by more than just doctor and patient. "It's beautiful, Emma. Absolutely beautiful." "Dr. Harrison, are you okay? You look funny," Emma said with the perceptiveness that had amazed him from their first meeting. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about how proud I am of how well you're recovering." Catherine looked up from her magazine, noting the strange tone in Michael's voice. "Doctor, is everything all right? You seem a bit shaken." Michael met her eyes, seeing in them the genuine love and concern of a mother who had devoted her life to caring for the child she had chosen as her own. Whatever decisions he made about revealing the truth would have to consider Catherine's role in Emma's life and the bond they shared. Actually, I have some very good news. Emma's latest test results show that her heart is functioning even better than we hoped. I think we can start discussing discharge plans. Emma clapped her hands together in excitement. I can go home soon? Very soon, within the next few days if everything continues to progress as well as it has been. As Michael left Emma's room that afternoon, his mind was spinning with questions that had no easy answers. He had spent 23 years grieving for a daughter he thought he had lost, only to discover that she had been alive all along, growing up with another family, becoming the remarkable child he had fallen in love with as her surgeon. The question now was what to do with this earth-shattering knowledge. Should he tell Emma and Catherine the truth? Should he maintain the secret and continue his relationship with them as family friend and physician? Or should he step back entirely, knowing that staying involved might complicate their lives in ways they didn't deserve? One thing was certain: his heart, which Emma had correctly identified as thawing, was now completely exposed and vulnerable. The little girl upstairs wasn't just a patient who had reminded him how to love again. She was his own daughter, the child he had mourned for 23 years, and the greatest gift he had ever received. Dr. Michael Harrison sat in his office late into the night, staring at the two pictures Emma had drawn for him. The first showed them holding hands beside her repaired heart. The second depicted them celebrating under a rainbow, with the promise that everything would be happy from now on. How prophetic those innocent drawings had become, created by a child who had no idea she was illustrating the reunion of a father and daughter, separated by circumstances beyond their control. 3 days had passed since Sarah's revelation, and Michael had barely slept. Every moment he spent with Emma now carried the weight of this incredible secret. When she smiled at him, he saw his own expressions reflected in her face. When she laughed, he heard echoes of the joy he had imagined sharing with the daughter he thought he had lost. When she reached for his hand during their conversations, he felt the profound connection that transcended medicine and spoke to the deepest bonds of family. But with this knowledge came an agonizing dilemma. Emma was scheduled to be discharged the following morning, returning home with Catherine to begin the next phase of her recovery. She would need regular follow-up appointments, ongoing medication management, and 2 additional surgeries over the next few years. Michael would continue to be her cardiologist, which meant he would remain in her life professionally. But the question that tortured him was whether he had the right to claim a more personal role in her future. Catherine had proven herself to be an exceptional mother, devoted and loving in ways that honored the deepest meaning of parenthood. Emma was happy, secure, and thriving under her care. Did Michael have the right to disrupt that stability with revelations about biological connections that might confuse and upset a 7-year-old child? On the other hand, Emma had already begun to think of him as family, inviting him to dinner and expressing concern for his emotional well-being with the intuition that now made perfect sense. She had somehow recognized their connection on a level that bypassed conscious understanding, and her presence in his life had begun healing wounds he had carried for over 2 decades. A knock on his office door interrupted his tormented thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting to see his assistant or one of the night shift nurses. Instead, Catherine Thompson entered the room looking tired but determined. She closed the door behind her and took a seat across from his desk without being invited, a departure from her usual polite demeanor that immediately put Michael on alert. "Mrs. Thompson, is everything all right? Is Emma okay?" "Emma is fine. She's sleeping peacefully, excited about coming home tomorrow." Catherine's voice was steady, but Michael could see the tension in her shoulders. "I need to talk to you about something else, something that's been bothering me for the past few days." Michael's heart began to race. "What's troubling you? You've been different since Tuesday, more emotional, more invested in Emma's case than even before. And yesterday, when you were looking at her, I saw something in your expression that I couldn't quite identify. It was like you were seeing her for the first time, but also like you had been searching for her your whole life." Catherine leaned forward in her chair, her eyes never leaving Michael's face. "Dr. Harrison, I may not have given birth to Emma, but I know my daughter better than anyone in this world. I know when she's hiding something, when she's worried about something, and when she's keeping secrets. And for the past 3 days, she's been asking questions about family and fathers and why some children look like their parents while others don't. Michael felt the color drain from his face. What kind of questions? She asked me if she looks like me. She asked if her father might still be alive somewhere. She asked if it's possible for people to love each other without knowing they're related. Catherine's voice grew softer. She also asked me if I thought you might want to be her daddy someday. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. His daughter, with the same intuitive understanding that had allowed her to recognize his sadness and offer comfort, was somehow sensing the truth about their connection. Mrs. Thompson, Please let me finish. Catherine held up her hand. I adopted Emma when she was 4 years old. Her biological parents were listed as unknown on the adoption paperwork, and I never questioned that. I was so grateful to have her in my life that I didn't want to dig into a past that might complicate our future. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. But yesterday, after seeing the way you looked at her, I called the adoption agency. I asked them to send me whatever information they could about Emma's background. This arrived by courier this morning. Michael's hands shook as he accepted the envelope. Inside were photocopies of adoption documents, medical records, and a birth certificate that made his knees weak. Emma Rose Mitchell, born to Sarah Coleman Mitchell and father unknown. But attached to the birth certificate was a handwritten note from Sarah, sealed in an envelope marked, "To be opened only if my daughter ever needs medical history information." With Catherine's permission, Michael opened the envelope and read Sarah's letter aloud. To whoever cares for my daughter, Emma Rose Mitchell was born on March 15th, and she is the most beautiful child I have ever seen. Her biological father is Dr. Michael Harrison, a cardiac surgeon in training. Michael doesn't know about Emma's existence because I was too ashamed to tell him. After we lost our first child together, I couldn't bear the thought of putting him through the uncertainty of another complicated pregnancy. Emma was born healthy, but I know that heart conditions can be hereditary, and her father should be informed if she ever needs cardiac care. Michael is a good man who deserves to know about his daughter, and Emma deserves to know that her father is someone who dedicates his life to healing children's hearts. If you are reading this, it means I was not strong enough to be the mother Emma needs. But please know that she is deeply loved by both of her biological parents, even if we couldn't find a way to raise her together. The letter was dated 7 years ago, written when Sarah made the decision to place Emma for adoption. Michael looked up at Catherine, whose face was streaked with tears. "So it's true," Catherine whispered. "You're her biological father." "I found out 3 days ago. My ex-wife Sarah came to see me after she read about Emma's surgery in a medical journal. She recognized her in the photograph and knew I had to be told the truth." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "That explains so much. The way Emma connected with you from the very beginning, the way she seemed to understand your emotions better than a 7-year-old should be able to, and the way you looked at her, like you were seeing a miracle. Catherine, I want you to know that I'm not here to disrupt Emma's life or to challenge your role as her mother. You've given her everything I could have hoped for and more. You've loved her and protected her and raised her to be the remarkable child she is today. But you want to be part of her life, really part of it, not just as her doctor." Michael nodded, unable to trust his voice. Catherine stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "You know, when I first decided to adopt Emma, I used to worry that someday her biological parents might come looking for her. I was terrified that they would take her away from me, that I would lose the child who had become the center of my world." She turned back to face Michael. "But watching you with Emma these past few weeks, seeing how much you care about her happiness and well-being, I realize that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. Emma has room in her heart for all the people who love her." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Emma needs her father in her life and you need your daughter. The question is how we're going to make this work in a way that's best for her." Michael felt tears streaming down his face. "Catherine, I can't thank you enough for your generosity. I know this isn't easy for you. Actually, it's easier than I thought it would be. I've watched you with Emma, And I know you love her the way a father should. You've already proven that you'll put her needs ahead of your own desires. That's all any mother could ask for in a co-parent. Co-parent? Catherine smiled through her tears. Michael, Emma has been asking me if I think you might want to be her daddy someday. What she doesn't understand is that you already are her daddy. You have been since the moment she was born. The question is whether you're ready to step into that role officially. The next morning, Michael arrived at Emma's room to find her packed and ready to go home, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm and a new coloring book under the other. Catherine sat beside the bed, looking nervous but determined. Emma, honey, doctor. Harrison and I need to talk to you about something very important before we go home. Emma looked back and forth between the two adults, her expression serious. Is it about my heart? Is something wrong? No, sweetheart. Your heart is perfect. This is about something else, something wonderful. Michael pulled up a chair so he could sit at eye level with her. Emma, do you remember how you told me that sometimes you talk to my little girl who went to heaven? Yes. I told her you were taking good care of me. Well, it turns out that my little girl in heaven has been watching over both of us in a very special way. Emma, you are my daughter. You're the gift I never knew I had been given. Emma's eyes widened as she processed this information. You mean you're my real daddy? I'm your biological father, yes. But Catherine is your real mommy in every way that matters. She's the one who has loved you and taken care of you and made you feel safe and happy. Emma looked at Catherine with concern. Are you still going to be my mommy? Always, sweetheart, forever and always. But now you get to have a daddy too if you want one. Emma turned back to Michael with the biggest smile he had ever seen. I knew it, she said triumphantly. I knew there was something special about you. My heart knew even when my brain didn't understand. She launched herself into Michael's arms with such force that he nearly fell backward in his chair. As he held his daughter for the first time, knowing who she really was, Michael felt the final pieces of his broken heart click into place. Does this mean you'll come to dinner for real now? Not just as my doctor, but as my daddy? If you want me to, Emma. If you'll have me. Of course I want you to. I've been practicing having a daddy for weeks now. I'm really good at it. Michael laughed through his tears, marveling at his daughter's resilience and capacity for joy. I've been practicing being a daddy for 7 years without knowing it. I think we're going to make a great team. As they left the hospital together that morning, Emma walking between her two parents with a hand in each of theirs, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had started as a surgeon who thought he was treating just another patient, but Emma had turned out to be so much more. She was his daughter, his teacher, his guide back to emotional wholeness. The little girl who had recognized his sadness and set out to heal his frozen heart had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams. She had not only thawed his capacity for love, but had given him the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to be the father he had always dreamed of being. 6 months later, Michael sat in the backyard of Catherine's house, watching Emma play on the swing set he had installed for her birthday. The legal paperwork had been completed, establishing him as Emma's biological father, while maintaining Catherine's full parental rights. They had become an unconventional but deeply loving family, bound together not just by genetics or legal documents, but by the kind of love that transcends traditional definitions. Emma was thriving, her heart growing stronger with each passing day. She would still need those 2 additional surgeries, but Michael had no doubt she would face them with the same courage and optimism that had carried her through the first one, and this time, she would have both of her parents holding her hands through every step of the journey. "Daddy, push me higher," Emma called from the swing, her laughter filling the evening air. As Michael got up to push his daughter's swing, he thought about the child who had gone to heaven 23 years ago, and the child who had come back to him in the most unexpected way. Both Emmas had changed his life profoundly, one through loss and one through recovery. Together they had taught him that love never truly dies. It just finds new ways to manifest itself in the world. The surgeon had thought the girl was just another patient, but she had turned out to be his salvation, his second chance, and his greatest joy all rolled into one remarkable 7-year-old package. Emma had known his secret before he knew it himself, that deep down, he was a father who had never stopped looking for his child, and she was the daughter who had been waiting her whole life to find her way home to his heart.